Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 110, 11001001.
Welcome into
another episode of
Mission Log, a
Roddenberry Star Trek podcast.
I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray.
Are you sure we should do the whole show like this?
It was good. I thought we nailed it. I thought we inhabited the characters.
I think we might have screwed up one part.
Which was?
People can figure it out. Each week on Mission Log, we break down a Star Trek story into the tiniest bitty bits possible, parsing the yeses and nos, the zeros and ones of that episode to see what the messages are and whether the whole thing stands the test of time. Today, it is the long-awaited sequel, 11001001, which is, of course, the sequel to 11001000. Now, if you haven't heard or seen that one, don't worry, because we'll catch you up. Because you got a lot of catching up to do if you're just joining us 1 million episodes in.
And if you've been listening to us long enough, I think you knew that you had to expect an opening like that.
Kind of.
I mean, because I think we both had exactly the same idea.
Oh, yeah.
About the opening. So,
and I hate to do this, but already this early in the show, I have to make two corrections.
Okay.
It's 11 million, not 1 million. I have a problem with the big numbers. And then the other thing, I think we reversed who we are earlier, and that just feels dumb. So, for the record, I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the Binar thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
Yeah, maybe. You can say.
All right. Well, if you want to correct us or help us, if you want to accept our apologies or our thanks, you can get in touch with us in many, many ways on the internet. You can join us at Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. The handle in all three of those places, Mission Log Pod. You can call us at 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. And on our own website, which is missionlogpodcast.com, you will find many things like the discovered documents, which you should definitely be checking out. And we have two other places where you can pick up Mission Log we want you to be aware of, trekmovie.com and Trek FM, which is trek.fm. And please remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Beep, borp, beep, borp. You know what that means. It's time for John Champion's trivia. That's binary, by the way, for it's time for John Champion's trivia. It takes a lot less time to say stuff in binary.
Okay.
By the way, let me just go ahead and stop before we get the emails. I know next to nothing about binary. I know there are zeros and there are ones. So anything that I say about binary after that, just don't bother correcting me, because I know this stuff's out there for me to learn.
But we can't hold you to it.
Yeah, I wish you wouldn't. I'll put it that way. God bless you if you speak binary or whatever.
Okay,
John.
So, Ken, today's episode, the TNG title is 11001001. But and we didn't plan it this way. This is the 110th episode of Mission Log. So technically today's show is 11011001001.
Yeah, you're going to start the technological singularity.
I will. I will. I just blew you away and half our audience. But you may be asking, what does the binary title mean? Well, you can translate those numbers in many, many different ways. So it would be the number 201 if you translated that to decimal. It could be looked at as a number that is very close to pi in binary. It could even be the letter E with an accent over it. In, I believe it's Windows, one variant of Windows for Unicode. So, so there are many, many ways you can translate this. But realistically, what do these numbers mean? Well, it's the names of the Binar characters that we meet in the show. We have 10 and 01 first, and then later we meet 11 and 00. And that must make addressing Christmas cards very difficult on the planet Binus. Now, in this episode, you probably noticed a very nice reuse of the Starbase model first seen in the TOS movies, though the scale is a little off for the use of the Enterprise D. The Enterprise D is much bigger than the old Enterprise. And you know what? They knew this at the time. And it's still a good special effect, but they would rather have kept the effect and done it on a budget than do nothing at all, because otherwise we'd have just had people describing, hey, look, we're going into a space dock now, and then cut to an interior on space dock somewhere and not actually see the Enterprise flying in. Now, the storyline for this episode would have been a little bit different if they had kept to the original production schedule. This episode was supposed to have been before The Big Goodbye, and it was the Bynarr upgrades that made those characters in The Big Goodbye so real. So they made some reference to that in the new timeline in the episode, with Riker saying that they were delayed when they get to Starbase. He says that they were delayed, and that's referring to Angel 1 and then jumping over to the neutral zone right after that. And also a reference to the Bynarrs finding the damage that occurred from the probe, which was in The Big Goodbye. However, it would have made more sense if you keep the original timeline for things like Picard's reaction to the upgrades in the first place, or him stating that he wants to, quote, get lost in the pages of an old book. I'm going to mention a few actors here. Gene Donarsky as Commander Quinteros on the Starbase. He appeared in The Mark of Gideon, but more prominently, he was Ben in Mudd's Women. So you definitely take a look back, and it's unmistakable that is Gene Donarsky. And Carolyn McCormick, of course, the other big standout in today's show. She has had a very busy career since Next Generation. She has appeared on multiple versions of Law and Order. In fact, she has played Dr. Elizabeth Olivet in 5 different TV series. Law and Order New York Undercover, Law and Order SVU, Law and Order Criminal Intent, and Law and Order Trial by Jury. So she's sort of like the Michael Dorn of Law and Order, just getting to play the same character all over the place. And
no, actually, she's like the Richard Belzer.
Oh yeah.
Munch. I can't remember. Actually, has the record, I believe. Richard Belzer's character Munch has the record for playing the same character on the most number of shows, but they're disparate shows. Like, he played Munch on the X-Files.
Oh, wow.
And he played Munch on Homicide, and he played Munch on Law & Order. And, of course, once you're on one of the Law & Order shows, you get to be on almost all of them, right? At least one time as a crossover thing.
Yeah.
Wow. So, yeah, that show actually spawns all kinds of records, I guess.
Hear all about it in our Law & Order podcast starting in the year 2030.
I was going to say 2030 after Moonlighting and whatever that other one is that we have to do after that.
Yeah. Now, Carolyn McCormick also appeared in the movie Enemy Mine, which may or may not parallel another well-known episode of Next Gen.
His eyes open.
Yeah, there you go. And it's interesting to me that she pretty much only worked as an extra before landing the role on Next Gen. I mean, she did have some featured roles as well, but this was one of her first really breakout roles. Speaking of Michael Dorn, as I was earlier, that is his voice that we hear as the male computer voice during the evacuation scenes on the Enterprise. And finally, there are 4 women who played the Bynarrs, Katie Boyer, Alexandra Johnson, Iva Lane, and Kelly Ann McNally. Now, Lane actually appeared in Star Trek The Motion Picture as a crewman, a human that time. So she can be spotted on the bridge as well as in the rec deck scene where everybody is on. And their voices were down-pitched in post-production. This whole technique, not unlike the method used to create the Telosians in The Cage.
Not knowing binary is no excuse for misrepresenting binary. For example, beep borp is not binary. I'm beginning to think neither of these guys is the man for me.
Prologue. The Enterprise is putting in at Starbase 74 for routine maintenance. Couple of upgrades. They're even going to get some upgrades to the holodeck. Wow. Mentioning the holodeck in the prologue. I'm sure everything will be fine. Enterprise maintenance will be overseen by Commander Quinteros, which is no small thing. He oversaw construction of the 1701D. No, the small things are the binars, a matched pair of beings sort of making up one person, maybe. Think of them like Thing 1 and Thing 2. Except they speak and think in binary, so it'd be Thing 1 and Thing 0. Actually, these are Things 1, 0 and Thing 0, 1. The binars seem a little stressed. They've only got 48 hours to complete their upgrades. It should be okay, though. Picard's going to spend his downtime reading. Riker's got no plans. Something will turn up, though. It always does. On the bridge, Riker is surprised to find a second pair of binars working on the Enterprise computer. He's not sure everything's okay. He leaves Wesley Crusher to keep an eye on the bridge and the binars. Act 1. It looks like Riker is the only one without plans for downtime. Yar, Worf, and some others are going for some pickup Parisi squares on the starbase. Dr. Crusher is going to meet some cybernetics expert. Geordi is teaching Data to paint. Yeah, maybe Riker will check out what's going on the holodeck, which the binars have just finished upgrading. He chooses a late 1950s jazz club in New Orleans, complete with a bass player, piano player, drummer, and a trombone for Riker to play. And an audience of one. After cycling through a few holodeck-generated females, Riker says hello to Minuet. It's like she was made for him. Which, of course, she was, but this is different. It's like she knows what he's going to say before he says it. The binars, who had been checking his reaction, make a quiet exit. Act 2. On the bridge, Wes is learning more about the binars. They live almost completely intermixed with their computers. It has advantages and disadvantages. Captain Picard stops by the bridge to check on Wes and the work being done. Now he's off to Holodeck 4 to say hey to Commander Riker. Riker, who is on the holodeck doing who knows what. It's cool, though. He's just sitting in with the jazz trio. He tells Minuet he has to go do some work for a bit, though she asks if they can have one dance first. On the dance floor, they talk about Riker's work, how much it means to him, how lucky he is. But man alive, is she so real. Yeah, he knows she's not real, but boy, she sure could be. She thanks him for saying so. It's then that Picard walks in without so much as knocking. Luckily, Riker and Minuet were just making out. Minuet is almost as captivating to Picard as she is to Riker. Not like she's hitting on him, though. More like a wife or girlfriend trying to impress her significant other's boss. And doing a bang-up job. Back outside the holodeck, young Mr. Crusher, who seriously has the bridge, is detecting trouble with the magnetic containment field which contains the antimatter. He's called Data and LaForge, who will head to engineering to check it out. They tell him not to disturb Picard and Riker until they know what's up. They get to engineering, and it turns out what's up is all hell's breaking loose. The magnetic containment field is falling apart. When it does, the ship will explode. Based on available information, Data decides the best thing to do is evacuate the Enterprise and program it to move at top speed as far away from Starbase 74 as possible. He calls for all personnel to abandon ship. Act 3. All personnel are abandoning ship. There's one potential issue, though. No one has seen Riker and Picard. Come to think of it, where are the binars? And, hey, the magnetic containment field turns out to be fine. Bummer part, that's the last reading they get from the ship before it speeds off on its automated way. Back on the holodeck, Picard is finally starting to think that he's maybe a third wheel on this date between Riker and Minuet. Minuet says she and Picard should dance, but he says he doesn't dance. Well, have some more wine then. Thanks, really, but Picard must be going. Finally, Minuet says Picard can't go. Not yet. And now both officers get the fact that something's up. Picard calls for the exit and finds the ship under red alert. Picard and Riker are the only Starfleet personnel on the Enterprise. A quick quiz of the computer lets them know that they are on their way to the homeworld of the binars. They ask Minuet what the deal is, though she says she's not programmed to give that answer. She was just supposed to keep Riker occupied. Picard showing up was a happy accident. The captain and the first officer leave the holodeck to retake control of the Enterprise. Act 4. Unable to contact the bridge, Picard and Riker head to engineering. Their plan? Set the ship to blow up, retake the bridge, then stop the ship from blowing up. They'll have 5 minutes to pull that off. On their way out of engineering, the officers notice a huge amount of data being uploaded and stored to the Enterprise computer. Another part of the mystery. Unable to simply walk onto the bridge, Riker and Picard beam onto different places. Hopefully one of them will survive and be able to regain control of the ship. Otherwise, no more ship. Back on Starbase 74, Data's wondering if he should have maybe never left the bridge, or never leave it again. He's afraid he was negligent, spending his time learning to paint. A well-written Tasha Yar tells him that such speculation is pointless. He could have been on the bridge and still this might have happened. Back on the Enterprise, Picard and Riker do their 2-point B-men, only to find 4 unconscious Bynars laying against a wall. One pair wakes up just long enough to say, "Please, try to help us." Act 5. First things first, Picard and Riker stop the ship from blowing up. Now to make contact with Bynus and find out what's going on. Interesting. What's going on is every machine on the planet seems completely inert. Where the inhabitants literally depend on the planet's technology, they are just dying. Just like the ones on the bridge. This must be what they wanted help with. But who can tell them what to do? The answer, of course, is Minuet. Back on the holodeck, she explains that a star in the Bynus system went supernova. The Bynars figured that would send an electromagnetic pulse that would disable the planet's technology. But the timing got screwed up. The star went supernova early, and the Enterprise got to Starbase 74 late. So when it arrived, the Bynars hijacked the biggest computer they could find, that would be the Enterprise, did a core dump of their world's data onto the ship's computer, theoretically saving the world. There's just one issue: getting that info back to the planet's computers. Not surprisingly, they figure out how to do it. Riker tries, but he cannot. It occurs to Picard that since the Bynars work together, it may take both of them working at 2 terminals to get the job done. And that does do the trick. The Bynar world starts to reboot, the Bynars on the bridge come to, and yay! Except for the part where the Bynars now have to face formal hearings over their actions. It'll probably be alright, though. With everyone back on board, Riker goes back to the holodeck to continue his rendezvous with Minuet. But she is gone. He tries to get the holodeck to rebuild her, but it's no good. Which is a crappy way to say the end.
Poor Riker. You'd think that they would have kept a copy of the program for Minuet.
I know.
That's really, because you think about the Bynars, they come in and they need help, but they won't ask for it, and they mess up our stuff, and then they feel bad about it. The least they could do is say, okay, here you go, here's Minuet.
Well, so here's what I'm wondering. Were the Bynars, sort of playing jazz themselves there, right? I mean, once they see that Riker is kind of turned on by Minuet, are they actually, are they sort of riding the console the whole time then? Like,
I got that impression, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Because I assumed that they weren't, because they are off on other parts of the ship doing other things. Mm-hmm. And yet, there's something, I think Picard actually says later that maybe that was part of the Bynars programming. Although, again, if it's part of the programming, they should be able to leave her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we seemingly would have a copy of all of that.
You would think so. Well, they can make a copy of their planet.
Yeah, right. So you can make a copy of a holographic woman. Come on.
You would think so. Even the best holographic woman ever. And by the way, I know we haven't seen many.
Yeah.
But so far, she is the best holographic woman ever.
So far, yes. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
By the way, I also had to wonder if, the Bynars have done a pretty egregious crime here. They have people freaked out when Captain Kirk stole the Enterprise to go on a mission. And even though it was an important mission, still, he stole the Enterprise. And man, you put another ship in pursuit right away. And this guy is going to face charges and all of this stuff. And he only gets out of it because of a couple of whales.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we're so kind to the Bynars at the end of this, because they're kind of adorable, and they're small, and they're nice. Had it been Klingons saying, well, we're going to steal this ship because we have to go fix this thing on our planet, they would still face charges at the end of that process.
Well, these guys are going to face charges, or gals, or people, or beings.
These beings will, but Picard, even at the end, he's like, yeah, well, you'll have to, but we understand.
I don't know. I would think that Starfleet and the Federation would be in the business of saving planets.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah.
But they're also in the business of, sticking to the rules. What are the rules? Rule 1, don't steal our stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's true. But, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think you're being a real hard nose on this, honestly.
Oh no! I think it's perfectly acceptable that they not face a really difficult time in court. I wondered about it. I wonder if we would be easier on them because they're a nice species.
Yeah. Can I ask a ridiculous question?
Sure.
Was the planet always called Binus?
Yeah, well, okay. That kind of bothered me a little.
It's like, when they crawled out of the primordial ooze and, and then they eventually made the wheel.
Right.
And the cravat and, all the things that made society what it was. That they were like, I'm sort of a yes or no kind of guy.
Right. Right.
And thus was born a civilization of people who spoke in beep porp.
Right. Yeah. I think I had a note about that somewhere later on, but it kind of bothers me that you have the total monoculture that is just based on what they do.
Yeah. Well,
so
eventually they might change their names.
I will say this about the Bynars. They do exactly what was pointed out in a great video that I watched on crack.com. And that's that the Bynars have no idea how to lie. Mm-hmm. And in this video that I was watching, they made the point that here are things that characters in movies and TV shows do all the time that should not be a problem. Only in movies, when somebody is telling a lie, do they get stuttered? Do they stop? And well, we weren't doing anything. No, we were just standing here. No, people don't lie like that. Maybe the Bynars do, but nobody actually lies like that. People are pretty good at lying, and yeah.
Who are you hanging out with? Some people, I'm just saying, some people might get sort of flummoxed by that. But I get, I do get what you're saying. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. Yeah, God bless young Mr. Crusher for doing.
Yeah, he's the only one who could figure it out. Yeah.
Well, no, but he was also like, no. Initially, when Riker's like, so what are you guys up to? And they're like, nothing.
Right.
And Riker's like, I don't know if I believe him. And Crusher's like, yeah, but that could just be their way, which is true because Riker, as we talked about last week, I think is a big imposing figure. Mm-hmm. And the Bynars come up to like his knee.
Right, right. And they look up and it's just a forest of hair.
Exactly. Oh, thank goodness he actually has his uniform on.
I know, right?
I might have just freaked out entirely. I think I mentioned this in the recap, but pretty much the second, and I've seen this episode before, but I don't know them just from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. But pretty much the second he said, I'm going to get the holodeck upgrade, I was like, oh, guess what's in today's episode? Right. Yeah, if they mention that, yeah, right. It's, things are going to be fine.
Yeah, you'd think they could have like police tape in front of it, and just say, nobody even say holodeck. All right.
Pixnay on the holodeck, hey.
Right. Worf had that great line, if winning is not important, then why keep score? And one of our listeners said they wrote in an email ahead of time and said it's the only way you can tell who buys the beer.
Yeah, no, I think it was when to stop and start drinking beer, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I like my version better.
No, I do too. No, they're both good, yeah, but, when's
the onus?
When's Miller time? That's pretty much what that is. Yeah.
I thought Data's attempt at creativity through painting, I kind of blew it off at first, the first time or two watching it. And then I thought it was sort of a nice parallel to what exactly are the limits to manufactured intelligence vis-a-vis Riker's experience in the holodeck with Minuet. It's easier for him to believe when the form is a human female. He is totally drawn into it. He's totally into the idea that she can make decisions on her own. She is creating information on her own. But with Data, it's like, hey, yeah, nice try. Let the blind guy teach the robot how to paint. Cute,
Yeah, I think that actually warrants more discussion.
Okay,
maybe not.
Come back
maybe not today. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that happens in this episode that makes me wonder about emotion and creativity and thought and what have you. Data's convinced that he's not creative, and so he's trying to teach himself to be creative. But just by standing there in front of a painting, or in front of what passes for a canvas, I guess, and painting, he's actually producing more than a lot of painters I know, because he's just making himself do the work. That said, is he being creative? He might say no, and yet there's something there where there had been nothing before. So maybe he doesn't understand the creative process, and maybe he doesn't get that same thrill. I mean, again, this is Data trying to be trying to be human, which is kind of a weird... This is a weird thing for him to try to be human about. Because, yes, he can make a painting. Certainly he should be able to draw, no problem. But then does he feel that artistic or creative spark that, that he's apparently looking for?
Well, yeah, the question is, how much abstract thinking can he do to make something that is wholly original? And can you just take that information and transplant it into 100 other datas and end up with 100 other paintings that are exactly the same?
Oh, man, and it becomes like a starving artist show.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Data's just, moving into the airport Hilton, selling big things to go over the couch.
Right. Hey, how much vetting are we doing for people who are supposed to come on board to fix things? And are the Binars just totally resigned to the idea of being tech support for the whole galaxy?
I don't know. They were actually really excited to work on such a mobile computer.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were excited because that mobile computer is going to save their world.
Well, but I mean, I sort of got the impression they would have been excited about that anyway. It's interesting to me that the Enterprise computer is big enough that it can actually store all of the data of a planet that's very tech heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of weird and surprising to find out. And yet it was still able to, run the holodeck and fly the ship.
Right.
And keep life support going. I mean, the one thing it did do was it was killing power on decks where there was nobody hanging out. Although it wasn't really doing a good job at that because Riker was actually hanging out on one of the decks where it killed the power. They're like, oh, yeah, all power is being shut down on uninhabited decks. Oh, like the one I'm calling you from?
Right.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry, dude. Look, I got a whole planet's worth of oh, you're not supposed to know about that yet. Shh, nothing. Hey, have you played on the holodeck? Because that's working. I got to say, I'm a little, you said, okay, the order, whatever. I understand what you're saying about how the long goodbye would have worked better. I am so excited to have Star Trek remember Star Trek.
Yeah.
To have TNG remembers TNG even. This is not like in the first couple of episodes where they were like, yes, we of the next generation remember the original series. This is like, wow, where you been? It's like, oh, well, sorry, something happened 2 weeks ago that has, sort of like screwed with our timeline a bit. And then when Riker shows up to the Binars, they're like, oh, yeah, that alien probe thing, totally worked that out. And I was like, wait, we remember the alien probe thing. They're not even doing that in exposition like, oh, last week we got hit by a thing, but they're going to fix this now. It's not like, have you been paying attention? If you have, then you're picking up clues about, the fact that we've also been paying attention. That was exciting.
Well, it was done right. There was no lengthy exposition, and you could watch the episode on its own without having seen the other one. It didn't really matter. But
absolutely.
When you heard that one little mention, you're like, yes, yeah, I
continuity. Oh my goodness!
How dare they? How dare they start continuity now?
Oh, I think it's totally awesome.
And I know that we'll talk more about the differences in the holodeck that we've seen so far, but I do want to point out that in this version of the holodeck, we don't have the problem we did before with the characters being aware of the players' uniforms. So, Minuet is aware that she's a simulation, unlike Cyrus Redblock, but she doesn't say anything about Riker or Picard being dressed like a bellhop. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, because we had a little bit of discussion about that, about how much do the characters know about the people who are in there with them, and are they actually seeing what they look like as opposed to the computer just saying, no, here's how you interact.
Well, there's a thing that happens in this episode where they're talking about Minuet and how she's sort of anticipating everything that Riker is doing, and Picard says that we as humans put off so many tells for her to anticipate.
Yeah.
When Riker went onto the holodeck, he was looking to sort of lose himself in jazz and the affections of a lady. Mm-hmm. When Picard went into the big goodbye, or went into the world of Dixon Hill, he was looking to be Dixon Hill. And so there's a difference there, right? When Picard shows up, he may be putting off something where the computer knows, okay, well, he wants to be this hard-boiled detective, but he's dressed like a bellhop, and so that's going to play in. Whereas when Riker shows up, he's not trying to be someone else. He's trying to be Riker. He's trying to be like Riker with a whole bunch of distraction, but he's still trying to be Riker. So that could be why. I mean, that's distinction. That's describing a lot of sort of amazing work to the computer. But I mean, the computer is just showing up with amazing work in this episode. When Riker goes in and there's the jazz trio and there's the trombone, he's like, okay, now give me an audience. And so there are like 20 people in there. He says, whoa, too many.
Yeah.
I was thinking something a little more intimate. Okay,
Right.
well, in a jazz club, that could be like 3 or 4 people, but just by his intonation. Oh, you mean a lady? You mean one person? Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, without any sort of explanation at all. I was thinking something a little more intimate. Boom, the computer's, on the way. Of course, we have to cycle through like 3 or 4 women before we get to the one that's going to please Mr. Jazz Player of the Universe, but still.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a good little bit of tension when we think the ship is about to blow up, and then we're about to blow it up again. Mm-hmm. So they get ready to leave space dock because this crisis is happening with the magnetic field not holding, and then we get out there, and then Picard's like, well, I know what to do. We'll self-destruct the ship, because we saw this once in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Where Kirk is sort of doing the standoff, and he's going to blow up the ship, and it was really, really tense. And in this episode, we tease you that we're going to do it twice.
Yeah, but what's interesting though is this isn't even a threat. I mean, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, there was a threat that Kirk was making in this episode. Picard's just like, yeah, we don't know who's taking our ship, and nobody's allowed to have our ship, so let's blow it up.
Yep. Hope you're down with that, Riker.
There's a lot that I don't like about. I mean, maybe it plays into the whole binary thing again. I don't know, but I understand it takes 2 of them to decide to blow up the ship. Mm-hmm. I don't like the fact that it also takes 2 of them to decide to not blow up the ship, and that can only be done from a certain place.
Yeah,
it can only be done from the bridge, and it's sort of like, and they've only got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so anything could have happened, and it takes both of them again. So let's say they're running down the hall to get to the bridge, and Picard trips on something and breaks his leg.
Right.
Or Riker, it could happen to either of them. Yeah. But at that point, it's sort of like, yeah, no, seriously, computer, he told me, like he's out in the hall, but he told me to tell you not to blow up the ship.
Yeah.
And the computer would be like, yeah, but he's really supposed to be here telling me that, so I can't help you. Bye-bye.
I expected almost a little bit more urgency in Riker's voice, because they get up to the bridge and Picard says the command to undo the self-destruct, and the computer asks the first officer if he complies. And I expect Riker to say, yes, for God's sake, yes, I comply. Please do not blow up the ship.
Now, you see, what's bothering me is I think that actually happens later, doesn't it?
Does it?
I want to say that there's some time where they're going to blow up a ship, and then or maybe it's a different movie. I don't know.
Okay.
I've heard that before though, because then whoever it was that was in charge of originally not blowing up the ship turns to them and says, yes would have been fine, or something along those lines.
No, the first time that they're about to blow up the ship is the mention of the Bynars kind of throwing a wrench in the works and making it look like there's a magnetic field coming apart in the warp core, and I think blow up and take the starbase with it.
Right.
And so they evacuate the ship, and it's a cool, tense scene. And how come no one looks for the Bynars? Geordi actually says, I think we're the last.
Yeah.
And Data says, I hope so. And they don't even think about the Bynars until the Enterprise is well on its way out of there. So I go back to Data. This might be something to do with Data's sort of very interesting way of remembering things. Because, again, you would think that Data would be, binary. It's either on or off. He remembers or he doesn't remember. He knows how many people are on the Enterprise or he doesn't. Mm-hmm. And this is like a little later, oh, yeah, there were 4 beings doing tech support on our ship. Wonder what happened to those guys,
Except Data didn't see them.
Well, they didn't see them.
Okay. He's supposed to keep track of everything, even things that he can't see? Well, Data was in his quarters painting, so it's not going to be on Data's mind. He is now called, so from engineering, he has said, everybody get off the ship.
Right,
so
but
he can't see whether everybody is off the ship or not.
Well, yeah, but they were also running around the ship, and they also ended up back on the bridge, because they took the turbo lift out of the bridge.
I think you expect far too much from Data. You're expecting him to actually see what he can't see. Okay. No, I mean, seriously. He never even laid eyes on the Bynars, as far as we know. Actually, the whole episode, he never laid eyes on the Bynars, now that I think about it. Maybe at the very end.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So it's the whole thing with Picard and Riker as well. He hasn't seen them, and the computer tells him they're not there. You'd have to assume too that the binaries are actually wearing some sort of communicator, because that's the way that the Enterprise keeps up with who's where, right?
Right. Well, and they are wearing something. They are wearing technology.
Well, yes, but they're not necessarily tied into. It's like the best wide area network. Is that what they're called?
Uh-huh.
The strongest Wi-Fi in the galaxy emanates from Binus. It has to, because when the router on Binus goes down, right? Yeah. Then the ones who are on the Enterprise start dying.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing. So Wi-Fi, like galactic Wi-Fi, sadly though it's locked. It's password protected, and it's, binary, so good luck figuring that out.
I should not be so hard on the guys for not speaking binary. A lot of it is about life experience. For example, my first job was programming binary load lifters. They're a lot like evaporators in most respects.
So I love what's going on the holodeck. I love what's going on the holodeck in this episode.
So does Riker.
Yeah, no kidding. And well, he should. The Minuet thing, I love her name even. And I looked it up because I thought I knew what it was, but I wasn't sure. And the two definitions that I got were a slow, stately dance in triple meter, popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, or a piece of music for such a dance in its rhythm. I love the fact that they named her Minuet, because that's all she is. She is a dance for Riker to do while they're doing something else. She's a distraction. She's this very intricate and time-consuming thing. And I just thought it was just an absolutely gorgeous name. Just every level of what's going on the holodeck is kind of interesting to me.
Well, all right. Speaking about that holodeck, we did talk about how the storyline, if things had been produced in the order that they'd originally been intended, we would know why the characters in The Big Goodbye were such an upgrade, and why Picard would have been so thrilled with this new and impressive upgrade to the holodeck. But now we have a sort of new upgrade with the creation of Minuet. This is, even beyond what anybody on the Enterprise had conceived of before. I thought Picard should not be too surprised by any of this. And again, it could have been the difference in the timing of when these scripts were produced. He already had to contemplate the existential conundrum of his friend, who was stuck in there at the end of The Big Goodbye. And he's downright amused at Riker. He's amused by Riker. And he's also kind of playing it clueless that Riker is seriously having the hots for Minuet. Here's Riker having this, intimate moment, and Picard's just like, wow, this is so real. This is so incredible. I can't believe how good this is. She even responds to you. It's great. It's great. But it returns us to that old question again. Is the holodeck character alive in the sense of being aware, or is she just programmed to respond that way? And more importantly, how could we tell the difference? Riker indicates pretty early on that he will he will go all the way with Minuet to discover the answer to that and many other questions. He just has no compunction about it at all. And it seems to be a pretty well accepted use of the holodeck, that someone would lose themselves in it in that way. Minuet, I kept thinking about the idea that she is aware of the idea that she is a hologram, but there are moments in the script where, and I assume it was the direction that was given this way, where she sort of stops and presents information like a computer. When she gets caught, when Picard and Riker are onto what's happening, and her demeanor changes, and she stops being the seductive woman who's there to have an intimate conversation with Riker, and she starts being the voice of the binars for what they're doing. But I still wondered, even with that happening, how how aware is she of what is going on? In the same way that Picard's friend in The Big Goodbye was aware of his existence. He asked Picard at the end of that, what happens to me when you turn this program off? Will my wife and kids still be waiting for me at home? Yeah. And we know that when Riker goes back to the holodeck, Minuet is gone. So at least there is a partial answer to that. But the essence of that programming that was Minuet, if the Bynars just simply took her with them, and now Riker's going to try to make his way back to Bynars to take that from them. But does she have the same existential question that was raised in The Big Goodbye? Yeah. You think?
I don't know, man. Honestly, I wasn't concerned about her existential question this time because she didn't ask it. I was more interested in what was going on with Riker there. Although she does an absolutely fantastic thing that does make you ask that question, or could at least get you to ask that question, when they're on the dance floor. Mm-hmm. And Riker's talking about the way she smells, the way she feels, everything. He says, I believe, you seem so real. And she thanks him.
Yeah.
Who's thanking him?
Right.
Is the programming of the Bynars, is there actually sort of a console jockey running her? And so outside they're like, oh, well, thank you very much for noticing how good my work is. Well, hey. or is it this character that they've created, or is it the computer?
Right.
I mean, what's thanking him in that way? At the same time, I found myself as interested, if not more so, in what's going on with Riker at that point, because he is very aware the whole time that she's not real. And yet he's also very aware that she is triggering everything in him that a real person would.
Right.
There's a fantastic line, almost throwaway, where Picard says, "Doesn't love always begin that way, with the illusion more real than the woman?" Mm-hmm. And I think Minuet says something like, "Oh, spoken like a true Frenchman, Picard." But right. I mean, it's a fascinating thing, right? We don't. And it kind of hurts my head after a while. We are the people that we meet to a certain extent, right? The first time I meet you, or the first time I meet some woman or whatever, or I don't know, coming across a cop on the street, or the person standing behind the counter at the place that I got my coffee. I mean, they are pretty much a construct of me at that point, of what I expect them to be. I might make up a story about them afterwards. The guy might be the exact same to me as he was to the person before me, as he will be to the person after me. And yet I might think that person was really rude to me because I'm bringing so much other stuff with me. I mean, a lot of what's happening with Minuet is the great programming, but at least as much of it, if not more, is what's going on in Riker's head around it. And it's just that was the part that I kept getting tripped up on, wondering, okay, so not what is her level of understanding of herself, but what is our level of understanding about anyone? If we can come across this made up thing, this 3D representation of zeros and ones, and go, oh yeah, I could totally be in love with that.
Well, and in that respect, she is every bit as real as anybody else.
Right.
And we kind of talked about that a little bit when we were talking about The Big Goodbye. The idea that the emotions that are influenced by something that is a construct, a fake, I hate to use that word in this respect, but a fake idea like a movie or a book or a TV show or a play, or in this case, a holodeck as being an extension of that. The emotion is still real, even if the construct is not. Mm-hmm. Even if the figures that are there are holographic transporter technology, some amalgam thereof, which we'll, try to explain later on in other episodes. But what the person who is a part of that is experiencing is still real on an emotional level. And you just sort of have to make a distinction at some point to say, well, even if the experience was real for me emotionally, visually, was it real in the respect of it takes the place of experiencing that in the natural world? And in this case, I mean, can you say that Riker truly did fall in love with her? Well, you can certainly make that argument for sure. He goes back for more.
Yeah.
And he's disappointed when she's not there.
Yeah.
So the experience for Riker was real, even if Minuet is not. And it's arguable as to whether or not Minuet is real. She is as real as her programming.
You're right. People will stand around outside the holodeck and go, man, 20 years now, he goes in there and hangs out with this person that he's calling his wife. It's just so weird. But if he's living a life for those 20 years where he's happy, where he is getting that sense of fulfillment, rather than, let's play it the other way. So he's going to spend 20 years looking for that person, and after X amount of time, maybe he just goes ahead and settles. Or maybe he actually does find that person, but she's already married to someone else. Or maybe. So many different variables that don't exist there, and other people will look at him and go, oh, what a tragic thing that he just goes and plays in that room with those electrons and considers himself loved. But here's the thing. He considers himself loved at the end of it. He's got what he is. He's actually, that's probably a perfect relationship for Riker, actually, because he is his work after all.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting line.
Yeah,
and
I want to get to that in a second, but I will surprise no one, I don't think, by saying if Riker is feeling those feelings and those feelings are real for him at that point, it's only people standing around outside going, well, that's not real. Oh, well, that's wrong. Oh, well, that's not natural. I mean, it's only other people who aren't feeling those feelings who are going to have that, who are going to have sort of that. It's a societal pressure, basically, to not take joy that way.
Do you remember the movie that came out a few years ago called Lars and the Real Girl?
Never saw it.
Yeah,
it's in my queue. I know what you're talking about. But.
Okay, yeah. Lars, the Ryan Gosling character in the movie, has a relationship with a doll.
Yeah, except he doesn't, because the doll's not actually interacting with him. Forgive me, I haven't seen the movie, but I mean, there is a difference with something like Minuet or something that happens on the holodeck, because you are actually getting interaction.
Well, there is, yes, and I agree with you, because I mean the doll doesn't do anything, and essentially this is the relationship as a construct of his mind,
right? Okay,
but where do we then get to draw that line to say, well, no, this is less real, and Minuet certainly is more real, but is it because she talks? Is it because she listens? Is it because the programming gives us the illusion that she is thinking on her own? Is it the combination of, well, you've got Lars and the real doll, and then you've got that old software that I've talked about before, Eliza, that gives the impression that you are having a conversation with a psychoanalyst, even though you're not. It's just spitting back what you say back to you.
Right.
So, how complex do we expect it to be before we say, well, no, this actually is acceptable? I mean, because what you're saying, and I agree with you, is the people on the outside of the holodeck are going to say, no, this is not acceptable.
Right.
But it's our first officer, so we're not going to say anything.
Well, I don't understand why we would care, but I guarantee that people would. As long as nobody's being harmed. Yeah. I mean, that really honestly seems to be that seems to be the place that you draw the line. As long as no living thing is being harmed, then I don't see why it would matter to anyone. And yet I feel certain that, there would be people picketing and calling him a freak.
Yeah, but do you end up with something psychologically then at the end of the day that says, well, he's missing something by not having that interaction with real people? I mean, granted, he has interaction with real people because his job gives him interaction with real people, but he's not having a personal relationship with real people. He's having a professional relationship with real people.
Yeah, people are laden with disease and atrophy, and their hair turns gray and their hair falls out and they get wrinkly, and yeah, I'm not buying it.
And that's part of the journey, man.
Only because that's the journey that we've had to go on so far. If he finds, surprise, everybody, I don't see any problem with what happened with Riker and Minuet. All right, I get it. The problem with Minuet is, her programming can be terminated, but guess what? So can yours and so can mine. As the wise philosopher Jean-Luc Picard once said, we're all machines, we're just different types.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have very little problem with what happened there because, well, for a number of reasons. It's all right. Send your emails. I'm fine.
No, because I'm kind of I'm actually kind of there with you, though.
How can you not be? I mean, he's having. I mean, it's. Yes, it's a simulation, but so what? So are so many other things. So are so many of your dealings with people every day. Probably the waiter is not nearly as happy to see you as he tries to make himself seem when you walk in the door. You're dealing with simulations all the time. Well, he doesn't listen to this show, so what do I care? The things I say to my dad aren't necessarily how I feel all the time, but things go easier if my dad thinks that I think a certain way. So I'll go ahead. I won't lie to him, but I'm not going to be all like, no, you're wrong, and here's why, because he's happy with this son that he talks to when he talks to him, without me yelling at him about what I think of his beliefs and vice versa.
Right.
We move through life in simulation. We do. And some of it's constructs on our side and some of it's constructs on the other side. So if Riker's just going to go ahead and take that next leap and say, I would love to have a significant other that I could actually, hit like a snooze button. I can't do this right now, but when I can, it's going to be exciting. Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's optimal. I'm not saying that that's what we should all be aiming for, but I'm saying if that's what he happens to fall for, if that's what happens to happen to him, that's what happens to happen to all of us. We just view it differently.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm mostly there with you. I really am, because I think it's a good argument to make about the things in our lives that are constructs, whether it's with naturally occurring people or in this case, in the case of Riker, with a manufactured intelligence. He's still getting something out of it. I just wonder if there is sort of an ineffable other that we're missing here, with the fact that she is not human.
And yet you don't believe in spirituality?
No.
Huh. All right. You were a conundrum to me, my friend. You were an enigma wrapped in a riddle.
I am.
Yeah. So you don't believe in spirit, but you think you might be missing something if all you're dealing with is pure energy.
Well, no. I want no, because it's not that.
It was just fun to say pure energy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Good job.
We actually, I hate to be the timekeeper on this. We might want to call time on that, because I have a feeling we're going to come back around to it anyway, and I know we both got other things that we wanted to hit.
We probably will.
I mean, there was a whole other question that I had about what's real, on the holodeck. Is the stuff that happens on the holodeck real? I mean, certainly we've talked about whether Riker's relationship with Minuet is real, but then there's also and it's been a while, and I don't think it's actually a thing, but I'm curious. There's kind of there's a borderline, I will say borderline sexism thing going on here. When Will tells Minuet to say she loves jazz, she says she loves all jazz except for Dixieland because you can't dance to Dixieland. Riker says, "My girl." Right. Now, okay, there are situations certainly in life where what's the best way to put it? Well, okay, were she flesh and blood, and were that conversation happening outside the holodeck, that would be an interesting thing to say. Maybe he would know flirtation well enough to know that that's going to fly. And he may find that it does, and he may find that it doesn't, right? What I found myself wondering, though, is if you're, and he's not misogynist in this episode, so don't misunderstand, but let's go ahead and take it to its nth degree. Let's say outside the holodeck, he's just, Mr. Nice Guy, and everybody loves him, and everybody thinks, oh, he approaches me in such a kind and open way, as he must with everyone. I know that we have a good relationship. Yeah. Let's say they get that, right? And then when he goes into the holodeck, he's just ordering women around, because that's his thing, because the rest of the time, is there...
No.
Does what happens on the holodeck stay on the holodeck, I guess, is the question that I'm asking. Is what happens there real? Is it applicable to the outside? Or are you allowed to live in your fantasy life the way you want to live in your fantasy life when it's decidedly fantasy? Or do you kind of have to watch things where you're like, if somebody did wander in, let's say Picard had wandered in, and Riker's got, 3 women tied to the wall, and he's hitting them with whips. Okay. And that's really, really, really extreme. But is Picard then like, we might need to talk? Or is what's happening in the confines of that total fantasy space off limits?
Well, maybe this is where we come back to the previous discussion we were having. Maybe this is where I'm trying to find the place to draw that line between what is real. You kind of for real versus what is real to the player in the holodeck, and why there is a difference, because the holodeck assumes a kind of complicity for everybody who's in there and the characters. Now, the characters may be antagonistic, as they were in The Big Goodbye, but the characters are still complicit in what the programmer, the controller, the operator, the player wants to have happen. So a real person would not stand for either being, demeaned or abused or these things that could potentially go to the far extreme in the holodeck, which you could safely play out in the realm of fantasy in the holodeck, because those aren't real characters with real lives and real emotions. They are programmed. So,
well, there are two things I'll say. First of all, you say a real person wouldn't, and I'll say you just haven't met the right guy or gal. I mean, there are some people who actually would do that, but really, forget the holodeck. The holodeck is just an extension of Riker's head, right? The holodeck is an imaginarium. So, I mean, do you worry then about what somebody's thinking as opposed to, and I don't want to be all thought police about it, but I mean, is the attitude in play, let's say, songs that people write, or, you read somebody's journal, which you should not do, or, short stories that they write or things like that. I mean, do we worry about somebody moving around in society because they wrote a scary story, or because they wrote a violent story, or because they play violent video games, or all of those things? I mean, where do we start to worry about somebody in real life based on the fantasy stuff that they do?
Right. Well, I mean, we talked about that a little bit with The Big Goodbye, because I was talking about gaming and how I'm not a gamer, and I was intrigued by this argument that was going on between Roger Ebert and his readers a few years ago, where he was really coming down hard on gaming, saying, that this is not art. And I think he was going with the idea that games are primarily violent. And then you kind of get to that argument about, well, does the violence in gaming then increase violence in the real world? And scientifically, there's indication that that's not the case. So is it okay to let people play this out in fantasy? But then, is the holodeck too real? Is it too much a real experience for the player, that they actually feel like they are doing those things, as opposed to a little bit of a separation with a game where it might feel real in the moment, but it's easy to leave behind? I don't know. And by the way, just going back to your thing about his treatment of Minuet, we actually got a great article that I'm trying to get permission to post it in our discovered documents, but it's an article in a journal, an academic journal called Popular Culture Association in the South, and it was written by Rhonda Wilcox, and she's talking about, the article is called "Shifting Roles and Synthetic Women in Star Trek: The Next Generation," and there's a chunk of that talking about Minuet and what this relationship is between Riker and Minuet, and Riker sort of getting to live out this fantasy of the perfect woman that he's kind of in control of. Of course she says, "I love jazz," and of course she says, "I hate Dixieland," because it's exactly what he wanted to hear. So does it make Riker sexist? Well, not necessarily, but this is a bit of fantasy fulfillment that, again, probably would not play out in the real world, only the real world as real as it is in the holodeck.
Well, again, unless you found the right girl.
Right.
Which may sound, that may sound flip, and it may even sound borderline sexist, but I would say the same thing if it were Crusher, Dr. Crusher on the holodeck, looking for a guy that she could boss around, or looking for a guy who would say exactly what she wants him to say. Because, ultimately, on some level, isn't that what people are looking for?
Yeah, but does that then set a totally unrealistic expectation? Because Riker still has to live and operate in the real world, which is getting along with the people that he works with.
Sure.
Which he does.
Well, it kind of sets an unreal expectation unless you decide that expectation is being met in your fantasy life. In which case, you don't have that expectation when you're walking around in the real world anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Could be.
We keep coming back to that same topic, and I know we do have others that you wanted to hit.
Just a little bit. I do want to talk about the Binars. Not to be confused with comedian John Byner. I don't know if you remember him or not.
Nobody remembers John Byner.
Nobody remembers John Byner?
Hey, wasn't he the voice of the Thing in The Black Cauldron?
Oh, I think he was.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So at least one person remembers John Byner. I always thought he was kind of bizarre.
Oh, see, you do.
I know John Byner. Yeah, I know John Byner. Thank you.
Good job. All right. They have this complex relationship with their technology. And it was kind of cool. Wesley early on says, that must have tremendous advantages. And they're like, yeah, it has some disadvantages too. Like our whole world is about to be wiped out.
Yeah, weird that Wesley didn't say like what, because then they would have to either tell them what or go, nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and I thought, well, of course it would be them. They would be the ones who would be able to take the holodeck technology to the next level, probably because they don't see any separation between man and machine, which is the whole conversation that you and I have been having. Where is that separation and what does it really mean?
I don't think that's the conversation that we've been having, but okay.
Well, I think it's partly the conversation.
It's partly the conversation that we've been having, but then there's also just, I mean, the nature of feeling. I mean, I really think that's what we're talking about is, I mean, what's more real than what you feel in a way. And certainly there are people who would argue that there's a lot more than that. And I understand that on some level, but the ones that don't do harm, if you take the technology part of it out of it. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I wonder if the binars had been written today, would there be a darker side to them? Because, like I said, they're very friendly, they're very nice, and they're sort of small and non-threatening. But they're very benign. They're almost childlike. But then I thought there was this darker implication about how dependent we are on our technology. You know, when this show came out in 1988. We didn't live in a world where people were constantly connected via computer and cell phone and tablet and everything else and 1,000 channels on your cable or satellite. We didn't live in that world at that time. So the Star Trek version of technology in this respect is, oh, look, they've taken a really, really, really far step. That's not the way that humans act, but it's kind of cool that we get to use them to enhance our own technology. And I kept thinking that there might be a really dark side to this that we're just not seeing in this episode. And maybe that's one of the ways that Star Trek overall kind of looks dated, or maybe it's more of that projection of a better future. On Star Trek, their leisure time and the flow of choices and information that they have isn't nearly as diverse or strenuous as what we face now. You don't see people walking around the halls of the Enterprise looking at a phone and looking at a tricorder and looking at a pad all at the same time. Pretty much when people interact with each other, they're talking to each other.
Right.
When Picard is sitting at his desk looking at a computer, he looks at it for a few seconds and then he's done. And then he interacts with people. So that was just my thought that maybe we're more like the binars, or the fear is becoming more like the binars and not being as much like our heroic crew.
Well, even our heroic crew had the same problem the binars did, though. I mean, think about what happened in Star Trek 4. Here comes the probe, and we don't know what the probe is, and we don't know how to communicate with the probe, but, we keep dying every time the probe comes by because we are, not quite as interconnected with our technology as the binars are, but even in the 1987 telling of, the 23rd century, we are as dependent.
Yeah.
That's going to happen if you live in a star base off planet.
Right.
Kind of dependent on technology a bit. The one thing that I found myself, or one of the things that I found myself wondering was having Data be able to pull the trigger on abandoned ship. Part of me wondered if I wanted to have a machine make that decision. He certainly makes the decision more quickly than anyone else would have, which is good since they have next to no time. They've got 4 minutes according to everything on their gauges, right? Yeah. I don't know that if Geordi had been the one in charge, or if Picard had actually been present and had to hear from Geordi about it, would Geordi have been strong enough to say, look, I know you don't understand the intricacies of what I'm about to tell you, but trust me, we got 4 minutes to get everybody off this ship. Or would everybody have deferred to command? Certainly Wesley tries to. I mean, Data's like, gotta get everybody off the ship. We got 4 minutes and 17 seconds or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And Crusher's like, shouldn't we ask the captain? And Data's like, no time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's including the fact that, well, we don't really have time to track him down, or if he's like, look, if we track him down, then we're going to have to explain it, and then we seriously have no time, so let's just get everybody out of here now. It's kind of interesting that the Binars have actually made a similar decision as to Data's. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think Kirk would have gotten everybody off the ship in 4 minutes. I think Kirk might have evacuated non-essential personnel and then tried his creative thinking, to try to figure out how they can get around it. And maybe this is part of what was going on with Data as well. He's like trying to access his creativity, but he doesn't really have any, or at least he doesn't think he has any. And so when he comes down to everybody's going to die, well, let's get everybody out of here so everybody lives. It's admirable. At the same time, it ends up being wrong. And would somebody else had tried to find a different way to solve the problem? Having said all of that, then again, maybe Picard would have listened to everybody, since the second he finds out, okay, well, it's just the two of us, and we don't know who's taking the ship, and we don't know where it's going, so let's blow this puppy up. He can be pretty cut and dry about the whole thing if he needs to be. It was just, I don't know. On the one hand, it seemed like there was the danger of like a Colossus or Terminator kind of future if life and death decisions can be left in the hand of a robot. Then again, that robot, I think, is third or fourth in line for command. So,
yeah, well, I mean,
not really supposed
robot,
to have this problem.
Yeah, but that robot has gone through the multiple years of Starfleet training,
That's
as
true.
he explained to Lore, and he has achieved a level of command on the Enterprise, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree exactly with what you're saying. He makes the decision, and that may not necessarily have been his decision to make. That seems like the kind of thing that should go through the captain.
Except they couldn't get in touch with the captain.
Except they couldn't get in touch with the captain, exactly.
Right.
So
they can't get in touch. I mean, he is the right person to make that person. He is the right being to make that decision at that point. It actually just made me wonder about, should he be the person to make that decision? And here again is a problem with the holodeck. Why not just make a smaller holodeck where the ship can run itself? You know what I mean? Because you can program, we've seen this and we will see it more, and I know I'm not supposed to talk about what's coming up, but we'll see it more, where the holodeck is the computer on the Enterprise is really capable of some really like sort of creative thinking, or some creative seeming thinking anyway, if you give it the parameters to do that. Yeah. How we don't end up with ships that just, sort of fly themselves, I don't quite understand, but maybe that will be for Star Trek the next generation.
Sorry if my first job talk confused you. I pulled a Ghostbusters and crossed the streams. And in saying I pulled a Ghostbusters, I pulled another Ghostbusters.
This is one of those shows that I feel like we could do for hours.
Oh yeah.
And sadly we don't. I say sadly, but then some poor schmo has to edit the whole thing, and so maybe he doesn't have hours to do that. Plus, I think we would end up going around in circles. So instead, we find a jumping off point. The jumping off point, the sign at the exit says, time now to figure out the messages, morals, and meanings of the given episode, and whether the whole thing stands the test of time. A bunch of numbers, John. I can't remember. Is 11001001.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Is that your assessment of this episode, sir? Messages, morals. Does the whole thing hold up? Give your summation.
All right. Well, here's the thing. The Binars, we mentioned a little bit before. I don't know if they necessarily hold up. It is a bit of a monoculture, and I get it. That is their whole thing, but it's a little too on the nose. That, they're binary, and their names are 1 and 0, and they're computers. And it just, layer upon layer upon layer of hammering home the same exact thing. And that comes across as a little hokey. I kept thinking that somebody showed up at the writer's room at Next Gen one day in late 1987 and said, hey, I've been reading about computers. Did you guys know that they speak a language called binary, which is made up of 1s and 0s? What can we do with that? And then thus this episode was born. So I felt like that part of it didn't really, truly hold up. But other than that, as just sort of a minor complaint, I feel like this is one of the standout episodes of Next Gen so far. Really great use of the holodeck to be able to spark a conversation like the one that we had. And in fact, Ken, I mean, I think it's not just this episode that could spawn hours and hours of discussion. It's a whole holodeck thing. You know, you and I could do several hours on just trying to figure out the holodeck and what that means to the people who are using it. There was also a good build of tension in this episode. Like I said, we threatened to blow up the Enterprise not once, but twice. And it was kind of cool and creepy to see the Enterprise empty again. I always kind of appreciate it when that happens.
Yeah.
There may have been corners cut in this episode, but overall it's very good and it's very entertaining. Like I said, it's just the Bynars themselves who may feel a little dated or a little false in the episode, but that's okay because the overall story is really great. How about you?
I don't even have a problem with the Bynars. Honestly.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Because I'm kind of used to hokey aliens on Star Trek.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's it, really. And so if you're going to assume that sometimes the aliens are going to be awesome and sometimes they're not going to be awesome, I'm not looking at, like, the whole monoculture thing, but I'm looking at what's presented by them. I mean, I go back to... what were they? The snakes, the lizards, and the what? The lizards and the dogs,
the lizards and the dogs,
cats. Yeah, I mean those were bad aliens, and they weren't. And not only was they looked okay as long as they were standing stock still, but when they were supposed to be moving or doing something, they weren't great. Yeah. And then when you examine, their culture, there's nothing interesting there. Oh, right. I'm a snake. I'm a dog. Okay, whatever. I don't like you. Yeah. I don't like you either. There's nothing interesting about those cultures, and so you end up with a culture that has a very different look. You end up with a culture that actually, that's like a totally different culture, right? Not just, I don't know. So they did not bother me a bit. I love the grandeur that they're actually able to present in TNG. And yes, the scale was off from the Enterprise, from the Enterprise D to the space station. Yeah. But who cares? We are now on a Star Trek that rather than, as you say, like they would have done the original series, they would have said, oh, well, now we're in this space station.
Right.
Because they couldn't do anything else. They couldn't afford it. And it's neat to see, a lot of the grandeur that we've been told about for so long.
Yeah.
Once again, Data gets an interesting life lesson in this episode that is not part of the episode. It's not like a really big deal, but I love the fact that it's happening. Last episode, it was let's not look for trouble. This time, Data is worried that he might have been negligent. And Yar, and I said in the recap, a well-written Tasha Yar says to him, you can't beat yourself up for things you can't control. And that's pretty much it. We can, and I know people who do, second-guess ourselves about things that we have absolutely no control about at all. But then we sit there and say, oh, but what could I have done? Well, sure. And you could also, stop starvation, and you could, any number of things you could do if you were, superhuman, which technically Data is. But even had he been there, there's no guarantee that he would have been able to do anything. And that's a great life lesson. Don't beat yourself up for things that you've not, over which you literally had no control. Because, maybe you could have done something, but maybe you couldn't have, and you just end up paralyzing yourself. Kind of like Riker stopped him last week from paralyzing himself with the whole, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? Don't look for trouble, and don't beat yourself up about things that you really have no control over. The only thing that I had any problem with at all, and this is kind of nitpicky, and yet the whole thing sort of hinges on it too, Picard's ability to think like a Bynar saves the day, but the flaw is Picard wasn't supposed to be there. Riker was supposed to be there.
Right.
Minuet actually says that Picard being there was a happy coincidence, or a happy circumstance, whatever. And yet it takes two of them to restart the computer on Bynus.
Right.
So if things had gone as planned, Riker would have been by himself going, well, I could try to stretch over there, but I don't think that'll do it. And I can't wake up one of the Lilliputians because they're really out because I can't restart their computer.
It would have been like Richard Pryor in Superman 3 trying to reset that computer that requires two users to operate. It would have been just a comedic mess.
John, sometimes I think we're geeks. And then I realize we are, to an extent, You remember Superman 3. That's just, wow.
I don't know why that popped into my head. It's like Data remembering the colonists, just all of a sudden, and then there's this random memory. Yeah. I apologize. And I apologize in advance because more will come.
Yeah, no, it's totally cool. I've often said I wish I could defrag and reformat because I still know the bar that Jack Tripper used to hang out in. And you know, I would love to get rid of that. I would just, if I could have those bits back, that would be awesome.
So are we meeting the Regal Beagle later after the show?
Dude. I'll never forget now. I'll never forget. Yeah. So anyway, so as far as messages, forgive me. There was a whole lot of neat stuff here. This is not a donate paint issue. This is not a bonk bonk on the head, sort of episode. But oh boy, is there so much stuff here to play with. And it really, there's also, I mean, you're right. The tension is fantastic. Honestly, when Riker and Picard are walking lockstep down the hall to retake their ship, and there's also a genuineness about Picard in this episode. He's fairly free with the praise because this is the first time that we've seen them go back into Federation territory since Encounter at Farpoint, right?
Yeah,
they can stand down now. And so while we think of it as, well, this week we're doing this week we're doing this week we're doing this week we're doing this, for Picard and crew, this has been a leg of their mission, right? Yeah. And so he can actually exhale when they get into the starbase. And once they can exhale, you know what? Throw a snowball at Picard in this episode, and he'll probably be like, "You little scamp," because once they can exhale, he's like, "Well done, number one." And then he turns around to the whole bridge crew and says, "In fact, well done, everyone." Yeah. And then later he tells Riker again what a good job he's done. I mean, there's just this is a well realized crew at this point. This is this show really starting to hit its stride. It feels like. I can't guarantee that it's going to be like this every episode after, because certainly there's no guarantee. But this felt like one of, I mean, as you said earlier, this is definitely a standout of what we've seen so far.
Agreed. There are a few little messages that I picked up on. Ken, don't be a Bynarr. Ask for what you need. There's no shame in it. They could have saved a lot of trouble and a lot of effort if they had just done that. Also, in the respect of don't be a Bynarr, not everything can be totally dependent on technology. That might be one of their downfalls. They didn't have a backup plan that didn't require them to have a computer.
Well, okay, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, they would be. You'd go on a camping trip with the Bynarrs, you'd really be in trouble. It's not going to happen. And also, don't be like Riker, just going around falling in love with holographic diversions. Or, you know what, scratch that, just do. Yeah. Because Picard seems to be okay with the idea anyway, and the illusion is more real than the woman after all.
Yeah, and the one other thing I would say is before entering the holodeck, knock.
Yes, that is a good rule.
15 minutes later, there is no telling what Picard would have walked in on.
All right. Well, to wrap it up, we want to remind our listeners to check out Roddenberry.com because they have cool Star Trek things and non-Star Trek things. But we're assuming if you listen to our show that you like Star Trek, maybe even just a little. And they have all kinds of cool things like props, costumes. I mentioned last week scripts for the movies, and including the long lost script to the phase 2 that would have been the motion picture In Thy Image. You can get that at Roddenberry.com. Next week, Ken, what do we have?
Next week, John, we have Too Short a Season.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. You may be wondering, what's a knockout like me doing on a podcast like this? If you are wondering that makes at least two of us. End transmission.